You just spoke a minute ago about social justice, and you teach a course in social justice. Talk to me a little bit about the different social justice issues associated with cannabis.
Sure. So the background is, and the reason why people even talk about social justice and cannabis, is that if you look at the history of prohibition, a lot of it is steeped in racism, frankly. And so back in about 1900, there was a large influx of Mexican Americans that were coming in because of the war and because of political instability. And when they came, they brought the tradition of smoking cannabis, because in the U.S. that really had not been the case before. Before that, we actually had compounders who were like early pharmacists, and they would actually make cannabis tinctures. And the tinctures are the drops or liquids that you put under your tongue. So back between about 1850 and roughly 1937, 1941, when cannabis was essentially banned because of a very high tax, you could actually go to your compounder and you could get cannabis tincture. So it was perfectly legal. It was used for many different conditions. Big pharmaceuticals like Brother Smith, Kilden, Eli Lilly, they all made cannabis tincture.
I never knew that. I never knew that.
So it was pretty interesting that, our grandparents, great-grandparents were using cannabis all this time. And then as soon as Mexicans came across the border and were smoking, all of a sudden a big campaign led by a bureaucrat, Harry Anslinger, who handled alcohol prohibition too, he really targeted people of color. So Mexican Americans and also, quote, jazz musicians, aka blacks. And he started to connect cannabis with things like being a gateway drug, making people crazy, just making people dangerous. And so he got people to buy into that, and eventually cannabis was banned that way.
Yeah, they had all that propaganda. I do remember that, the propaganda pieces. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, a whole machine. And if you read some of the early headlines, it's just crazy about some of the stories that they'll report. So at any rate, after that happened, we also found that a lot of people of color were getting arrested at much greater rates than whites, even though use was similar. So ACLU did a very seminal study, and it showed that 3.64 times brown and black people were getting arrested as whites. So it definitely was unequal treatment. And when that happened, of course, you had families that were broken up, communities broken up, people ending up in prison. And so it's a very long preface to say that's why we're concerned about social justice, because we want to give people who were harmed by the war on drugs, who were largely brown and black people, a stake in the cannabis industry if that's what they want. So it's trying to make reparations for what those families have gone through.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was part and parcel of Nixon's war on crime that led it to be scheduled as a Schedule 1.
Exactly
along with heroin, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So yes, cannabis is still considered a Schedule 1 drug, along with heroin, LSD, peyote, and it's defined as being very addictive and having no medical use,
right?
No accepted medical use, which we know is just absolutely false and ridiculous. But yes, here we are stuck with a Schedule 1 designation.
Right, but how do we navigate that stigma behind cannabis since it's still classified federally as a Schedule 1 controlled dangerous substance?
Yeah,
that's the issue,
part
right?
of it. Yeah. Part of it is the normalization. Part of it is making sure that we have a safe industry and that people have the facts around cannabis. But I do think that some of the things that will change people's hearts and minds is when they see the medical applications. So, for example, in a lot of states, their medical cannabis program started because a parent stood up for their child, and the child had epilepsy in many cases, and so the parent wanted to give them cannabis instead of all the regular pharma that they were on. So you do have those kind of cases where people have stood up for their children. You also have cannabis patients and their loved ones who also stand up for them, because cannabis can be very effective, again, with pain relief, helping nausea, stimulating appetite. And then also you have CBD, which does not get people high. And it's been very popular, especially in an older population where people have aches and pains, muscles, joints, arthritis, things like that. So I think that when people see how effective cannabis can be as a medicine, that at least starts the conversation and starts to change a few hearts and minds. And then when they come to understand the prohibitionist history, then we see how important it is to try to include people who have been hurt by the war on drugs.